Welcome to New England Authors. Very good to have you. We explore the diversity of our region here. And today we have a wonderful guest, Charlene D'Avanzo. Charlene, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. This is great.
All right. You are a marine biologist who taught environmental science at Hampshire College for 35 years.
Almost 40.
Almost 40 years.
Yep.
Yeah. And has written an exciting series that takes place on the Maine coast, and it focuses on ecology and climate change, right?
Right.
And so I read the latest book, and it was really interesting. It's called Secrets That Haunt the Lobster Sea. It's the third in the series, and I want to talk a little about climate change. I want to talk about ecology and the economic impact of fishing in our region and lobstering. This is a lot about lobstering. But first, I want to talk about the book and your character. Your lead character is a woman named Mara, right?
Mara Toscani.
Mara Toscani, who happens to be a marine biologist, right?
Well, she's an oceanographer.
An oceanographer,
right.
Okay.
I'm a marine biologist.
Oh,
That's
what's
different.
the difference?
Yeah, well, oceanographers go out to sea in big ships. And
ocean.
when I was a graduate student in the Woods Hole area at the Marine Biology Lab, I went out on a big ship. I never got so seasick in my life. So I decided to study the coast.
I see. So, well, anyway, so...
but Mara gets seasick, so I used it in the books.
I see. Now, I just wanted to ask, how much of this character, Mara, this is a very interesting character, how much of that is you?
Well, Mara's a lot younger than I am. She's about 31, 32. She loves kayaking, and so do I.
Yes.
She's a marine biologist, basically, which is what I am. She absolutely loves water and the Maine coast, and so do I. So we share a lot of traits, but, you know, she's a lot younger than I am.
Yeah. And she, at the beginning of the book, she's in the sea, right off the Maine coast, and there's a mussel island, right?
Oh, well, it's a raft.
A mussel raft, yeah.
Right. Okay, so let me tell you about that. That's actually pretty interesting.
What is it? Yeah.
So that's in the most recent book, Secrets Haunt the Lobster Sea. So you have to figure out a way to grab readers, you know, when you start a book, right? And so I was kayaking with one of my friends, and we went out off of the Maine coast where we live, and there was this mussel raft out there. It was absolutely fascinating. It was this great big raft, and I was kayaking around it and looking underneath, and there's big ropes under there, and they're going back and forth, and they're covered with mussels. And I said to my friend, you know, that'd be a great place to stash a body.
Oh, yeah.
And she said,
that's a mystery writer for you. Okay.
So she said I was crazy, but I remembered that, and that's why I started the book that way. So this book starts with Mara finding a body underneath the mussel raft because, of course, she's very curious, and she wanted to go underneath the raft to see all these mussels, you know, how many there were, and did they have stuff growing on them. And she goes there, and there was something in the water, and she touches it, and it comes up, and, of course, it's a dead body.
It's a dead body.
Right.
Okay, so this is the mystery, and then what does she do after she sees this dead body? So of course, she calls the cops.
Yep, she has to call the Marine Patrol. So I had to learn I didn't know anything about Marine Patrol and all that kind of thing. So when you write these books, of course, you have to get everything right. She calls the Marine Patrol, and then somebody has to stay there overnight, and they get scuba divers the next day and all that. But that's how it starts.
Oh, and then she has to solve this mystery,
right.
And she goes out to this island where there's a community of mostly lobstermen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because the guy who died, his name is Buddy.
Yeah.
He came from that island.
Yes.
So she figures that somebody on that island was responsible for his death, and so she goes out there because her cousin Gordy owns the mussel raft, and now the police think that Gordy's responsible for the guy's death. She knows that Gordy didn't kill him. She's got to figure out who killed him.
I see.
So,
one of the things that you're saying about how much you love kayaking, Mara goes way out kayaking. I mean, I'm a tepid kayaker. I go out in the harbor and lakes and stuff like that. But she goes like a mile or even more out.
She goes off of islands.
Water.
Right. She goes out of islands. So actually, again, that in the third book, if you remember, she gets caught in a gale.
That's right. That's right.
So she's on an island. She goes out about alone, which was not very smart of her to do. She goes out to see this puffin island, and then she comes back and she gets caught in a gale. And it actually happened to me and my friends off of Stonington, Maine. So a number of the kayaking events are ones that I've suffered through, basically.
Yeah.
So that happened to me. It was the scariest thing that I ever encountered. I was with 3 friends. We scattered. There were big waves. It just came up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I really thought it was going to go over. Didn't go over. Finally got back to shore, and we found out that just up the way in Acadia, 2 people died. 2 kayakers died in the same event. So it was pretty, pretty hairy.
Well, that's the thing about off the New England coast is that things come real fast.
And the water is cold. And that's
Yes,
actually one
yes.
of the things that I emphasize in my writing is safety for kayaking. It may not sound it from what I just said, but I do. And certainly on my Facebook page, I talk about that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So this book is the third in the series. As I say, it's very interesting. And there's a part that I'm going to get to. You talk a lot about the ecology and climate change. But first of all, tell us a little about your other 2 books. So you have this one. Was this the first, Cold Blood, Hot Sea?
Cold Blood, Hot Sea, right.
Yeah.
So each of the books has what I call a climate change understory.
Right.
So in the third book, it's the very rapid warming in the Gulf of Maine and how that impacts lobsters and lobstering, which creates a lot of tension for the lobstermen, as you can imagine. In the second book, which takes place in Haida Gwaii, which is off of British Columbia, the Queen Charlotte Islands. The issue there, now it's a little bit complicated, is that, and this is a true story, the Haida Nation paid an American entrepreneur something like $1 million to put red, pink iron slurry into the water because he said it would stimulate the growth of phytoplankton, the little marine plants of the sea, as they call them, microscopic, and that would stimulate the growth of salmon. It wasn't true. And he also said they would get carbon credits, which also wasn't true. And so the marine biologists know all about this, and ecologists know all about this, and it was, kind of outraged the community. And I wasn't involved in that, but I wrote that book partly to understand why would they do that, because they have lived on these islands forever. And there's beautiful totem poles when I've paddled there. You come up to a beach and there's totem poles on the beach. I mean, you just have a sense that these people really revere this place. Yeah. And so it fascinated me that they would do this. And so the book allowed me to explore that phenomenon amongst, and it also is absolutely gorgeous, temperate rainforest and very spooky, and it's good for a mystery.
And this iron slurry that they put in, did it do ecological damage? Or?
No, it's called a geritol solution. It's been around for a while. It's known that if you put iron in the water around Alaska in that area, it does stimulate the growth of plankton. I don't think it really had a negative effect, but I don't know that. It did stimulate the growth of the phytoplankton.
So this book was really based on a real event that
Absolutely.
happened. Was there a murder in there? Or?
Oh yeah, of course.
Who gets murdered?
Well, again, Mara's kayaking out there. She's on a trip, and she's with her science friends, and they're there to represent scientists dealing with this issue, this slurry issue. But she goes out for a fun kayak. The rudder on her kayak gets stuck. And then she's with a group of people, and she goes this way, and everybody else goes that way, and she's heading for the Pacific Ocean. And so this actually happened to me too.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so that's also based on one of my experiences. But she gets saved by this wonderful Haida guide, a young man, and he ends up being the victim.
Oh,
I shouldn't have said that because people want to read the book, but that's.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out, in these books, which are called cozies, as you know, it's kind of a funny term, they're not thrillers. The deaths are kind of off stage a little bit. A lot of women read them. There has to be a reason why the protagonist cares about the murder, why she, in this case, wants to solve them. So she cared about this person who saved her life. So when something happens to him, she wants to figure out why.
Yeah, in a cozy mystery, there's generally no overt violence,
Right.
blood,
That's
overt
right.
sex,
Right.
vulgarity, and things like that.
Right.
But it's still thrilling, and you want to find out. I read this to the end to find out what had happened. Okay, Demon Spirit Devil Sea was your second one, right?
Right, that's the one that takes place in Haida Gwaii, the one with the pink slurry.
Oh.
Okay, so that's the pink slurry
Oh,
one.
that's the Pink Slurry. I beg
Right.
your pardon. Okay, I got it mixed up. Okay,
So
go ahead.
the very first book, and I'd like to talk in a minute how I came to write this book, because never in my life did I think I would be writing fiction, right?
Yeah.
I'm a marine scientist, and I wrote grant proposals and research papers. I never wrote a word of fiction in my life. And so something happened to me, which I'll talk about in a second, that turned me in the direction of writing fiction. But this book is actually partly based on that event. So the understory there is climate change doubters, and their challenging of climate scientists.
Right.
Okay, and that's a thread that's throughout the book, and it turns out that Mara ends up in that boat herself.
It's in the third book as well.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I was at Hampshire College, which I absolutely loved, I loved this job. I taught there for almost 40 years. I love the students. I love this college. It's in Amherst, Massachusetts. And right up the street is the University of Massachusetts. And one day I went to a talk by Ray Bradley. He's a very well-known climate scientist. He works on ice cores. And he's a great guy, which is important for this. And so I was expecting him to talk about his climate research, and instead he talked about the harassment that he was getting at the hands of climate change deniers, including in Washington, D.C. at committees that he had gone to. And he talked about that at length. He was very upset about it, as you can imagine. And so I left the auditorium, I went outside, and I was very upset. I said, first off, how could I not know about this? And second, I have to do something about this. And this idea to write mysteries, to write fiction, just came out of nowhere. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And then within about 6 months, I had left Hampshire. I had retired early.
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at retirement. I wasn't 21. And then bought a house in Maine. My husband and I bought a house in Maine. And started this whole thing. I had to learn how to write fiction.
Yeah.
I had no colleagues. I had a lot of marine biology colleagues. I had, I didn't know anybody or anything. And so Sisters in Crime and Sisters in Crime New England, which you know about, was a wonderful organization for me. So I met some people there. I went to meetings. I went to workshops, and I got beta readers who read your stuff. And I got a prize from Mystery Writers of America, which helped me a lot, in terms of feeling better about it. And, and then it all went along.
This is New England Authors. We're talking with Charlene D'Avanzo, and she's written this great book, great series about New England, about climate change. And you were talking a little earlier about climate deniers. Now, in your book, it's very clear that the climate is changing in the Maine coast, right?
Absolutely.
But a lot of the people who go out lobstering were in denial about that. Is that right? Is that true? Or?
Well, okay, that's a little overstated in the book. I have talked to lobstermen who have said to me that they don't think it's happening. But it may be that they're just talking to a marine biologist. I don't know. I've seen surveys, and which actually there's a survey discussed in the book. One of the characters talks about that, in which a lot of lobstermen acknowledge that this is happening and this is going to be a problem. So I may have overstated that a little bit in the book. I think the way I came to look at it is that I think it's really worrying them. And maybe they don't want to admit that it's happening, even if they know that it is. I mean, they're the folks who are out there all the time.
Yeah.
They see it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is threatening to completely change their livelihood and all of their existence. This is a very serious thing. Gulf of Maine Research Institute in Portland has done a lot of research on the Gulf of Maine. And the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than almost any other similar body on Earth. It's stunning.
Really?
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning. And it's partly, the Gulf of Maine is a big body of water from like Cape Cod up to Nova Scotia. And it's kind of a somewhat enclosed, has a shelf out at the edge of it before you get out to the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a bit of an enclosed body of water. And it's very productive for New Englanders. Cod, haddock, it's been very important for New England. And now it's changing a lot. The cod have gone, partly because of warming, but a lot because of overfishing. Things have changed a lot. And right now, lobstering is great because the temperatures actually has increased their reproduction or reproductive success. But what Andrew Pershing, who's a scientist at Gulf of Maine Research Institute, says is that maybe within 20 years or so, the lobsters will have moved north more. They don't actually move, but they'll be more successful in Canada. And maybe there's very little lobstering in Maine at all.
We had a guest on the show who was from Connecticut, and she wrote books about lobstering and other things on the coast of Connecticut, and she said the lobstering has kind of gone bust there because of climate change.
That's right, and Long Island. I mean, Long Island used to be a very important place for lobstering. There's a shell disease also that has happened there, which may be partly attributed to warming. I'm not sure.
Now, I'm sorry, lobstering is one of the most dangerous professions.
It's very dangerous, right?
Yeah, and now you were saying that because of the warming, they have to go out further and deeper.
Well, they would.
Which is
even more dangerous.
Even more dangerous, right?
Right.
And, well, what's the reaction to that? I mean,
well, like I said, I think it's if people really think about it carefully, which maybe it's hard to do, I'm sure it makes people scared, because this, lobstering in Maine is everything. I mean, we even have lobsters on our license plates.
That's right, in Maine. That's right. Yes.
It's a central economic factor for tourism and everything, and a livelihood for many people. So if something happens to lobstering, that's a very serious thing for the state.
I understand that the lobstering people are themselves trying to make some initiatives to change how they trap, and fishermen are changing quotas by themselves. Is that right?
Lobstermen have done a great job on conservation right from the get-go. So there is a limited number of lobster traps out there. Only individuals can be a lobsterman. They're not industrial lobstermen, groups of. And they throw the small ones and the big ones back.
Right.
And any female lobster with berries, so-called berries, eggs on the bottom, they put back. So they're really careful about it. And I've been out there with them. I mean, they're measuring the carapaces of the lobsters, making sure they're the right size. They're very proud of what they've done, and they've done a great job with conservation. They really have. And so that this phenomenon, which is beyond their control, is hitting them is kind of like a double whammy or something. It doesn't seem fair.
So now you're kind of like could I call you a climate change evangelist?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yes, because you're trying to bring this to our consciousness, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you chose fiction.
Yeah.
Now you talked about how difficult it was to make this transition to fiction. Why fiction?
Yeah.
Why not scholarly books or maybe not fiction type of books? Why fiction?
Well, of course, I'm trying to reach, regular people and not scientists, okay? So that's partly why not the scientific research papers. But it turns out, and I actually didn't know this and when I started, that fiction is a great venue for social change. I mean, if you think about it, there's many fiction books that focus on social change. And there's some research that shows that when you compare students, if you give them some fiction versus nonfiction, and then afterwards you measure their empathy, I guess there's a measure of empathy that social scientists trust. The ones who read fiction just previously are more empathetic than the ones who read nonfiction.
I'll have to use that. I'll have to use that research. Yeah.
So the idea is that and Barbara Kingsolver, who's written Flight Behavior, which is a very important book about climate change, has said that it has explained this in a way that really makes sense to me. You care about the protagonists, you care about these people, and therefore you care about what happens to them.
Right.
So for instance, if in the first book, Mara is being challenged by climate change deniers, who are challenging her science, you care about her, and therefore you care about the issue more, and you learn more that way. So that's the idea.
Yeah, so you're trying to make it a more personal thing.
Absolutely.
Do you know, are governments, local governments, state governments, and local municipalities doing anything to help the fishermen and?
Well, as I said, in Maine, the Gulf of Maine Research Institute is working very closely with fishermen, and I know there are many towns who are trying to protect their coasts, from water rising. That for sure. How many of them are doing much with lobstermen or other fishermen? I don't know.
This is our New England authors. We're talking with Charlene D'Avanzo, who's written a mystery series. What would you like to do? What would you like the effect of your writing do? Is it to change our consciousness, or to change laws, or what?
That's actually a really good question. I think it's, I'm writing for individual people who love mysteries, people who like fiction. And so it's basically, it's a teaching, is what I did before. This is I see it as a different kind of education. So to help people as I said, to understand what's going on in the context of an exciting story that they want to read with characters that they care about. So basically, that's it.
And you're training at Hampshire College. They're teaching there, which was it's a liberal college. Could you tell us a little about it?
Yeah, Hampshire was created in the early 70s by the other 4 schools. It's a 5-college area now. There are 4 schools: UMass, Smith, Mount Holyoke, and Amherst College. And it was created by, I believe, the president of Amherst College, right down the street from Amherst College, to experiment with teaching. And so I felt very fortunate after I did my postdoc, which I did up in Nova Scotia, to get a position at Hampshire. It was just perfect for me. And I stayed there. That was the only job I've ever had. So I just stayed there until I left to write these books. The students really care about learning. The faculty really care about teaching. And if you know what goes on in some institutions, some places, they aren't valued for that, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's a really great place.
Yeah. Now, have you had feedback about the message that you're trying to bring from the coast of Maine people, the fishermen, and so on?
Not so much the fishermen. There are people who come up to me on the street, or local people in town or something like that, but probably not. I don't know how many fishermen would be reading the lobster book, for example. They're probably not the community that I'm targeting.
Yeah.
It's a good question, though.
Yeah. So you're coming out with another book, right? That's coming out in 2019, right, this year?
Yeah, I'm just researching it now. I actually put it aside for a little bit to sell books and promote them, or, as you know, we have to do that as well as write them, and that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, is Mara in there too?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh yeah?
Mara, and yeah, so it's the same people in all my books. So if somebody wanted to start with the 3rd book, you could easily do that, and then go back and read the first one or the second one. Yeah, with the 4th book, I have kind of an image problem, because it's about eels. And so since a lot of people who read my books are females, I've been told that I probably shouldn't put an eel on the cover. So I have to figure out things like that. But it's about glass eels. And the reason why I'm interested in them, so it's partly an environmental story, but they have an absolutely fascinating life history. So they are born in the Sargasso Sea, which is this large body of water off the southern Atlantic coast, which is where sargassum weed is. It's a beautiful, big place, bounded only by currents. There's no land around it. And nobody has ever seen eels mate. They have found the larvae of the eels, and so what happens is the larvae drift with the Gulf Stream, and then they go up all the rivers along the East Coast, including Maine. And Mainers go out there with nets at night with these big green lights. It's very vivid in my mind. And they collect these little eels, which look like little leaves. They're about as big as a pinky, and they sell. You wouldn't believe what they sell for a pound, like thousands of dollars a pound.
Oh, what, to Japan to make sushi or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what happens to them is that these little eels are shipped to Japan, where they grow them up in aquaculture to adults, and then they, eat them because they've. I guess there are no eels left there. $2,000 a pound. I don't know what it's going for now.
Yeah.
So what has happened is that people are going over quota, and so there's trafficking of eels, and there's also a climate change issue because of the warming and affecting the migration of the eels. So I'm interested in it partly because of the environmental issues, but also because of the life history, and then also how it affects the people who are dealing with these thousands of dollars a pound.
Well, it's so good to have you with us today. This is New England authors. We've been talking with the bright and vivacious Charlene D'Avanzo. This is recorded here in Cambridge and seen on TV stations across the region. Watch locally.